Hey guys, in today's lesson we're going to make some changes to the user preference section of Blender so that we set it up in the same manner which I'm using it as to make it a little easier for you to follow along in this course. Go up to the File menu in the upper left corner and then go down to User Preferences and click that. I'm going to move the User Preferences to the middle. Zoom a little bit. Come over to User Interface. And let's just double check that these settings are all in the same settings as mine. You want tooltips on. Python tooltips, you don't necessarily need that on. I'm actually going to turn that off. I'll leave it on here, but you can turn it off. View name makes it easy. Playback frames per second, that'll be used for animations. We'll cover that later. Cursor depth, you want to check that. Cursor lock adjust, make sure that's checked. Zoom to mouse position, you want to make sure there's a check there. Rotate around section, you want to make sure there's a check there. Make sure camera parent lock is checked and auto perspective is checked. And this is on the interface screen, so we're going to save these settings and we're going to go to the next tab, which is editing. In the edit tab, we're just going to double check anything here that needs to be done, and there really isn't anything here that we need to worry about. Let's go to the input tab. In the input tab, I think I walked you through it before, but we're just going to make sure that the mouse is set for left click select, and that should be good enough. Now hit save settings. Under system settings, I believe these are all default, so let's go over to the Add-Ons tab. In the Add-Ons tab here, we're going to take a look at all the add-ons that come with Blender, plus the ones that we've added. We added this one right here, which is Asset Flinger, and we also added the PBR materials, which should be, if we scroll down to the P's, find, maybe it's under materials PBR right here. So those should be installed and checked. Now from the top down, make sure there's a check under display tools. Make sure we have a check mark in measure it. Make sure there's a check mark in modifier tools. The extra objects, I believe we turned that on the other day, but let's make sure that's turned on with a check mark. Make sure add curves, simple curves is checked. Bolt factory, you don't necessarily need that. If you want it, you can keep it in there. It allows you to import, when you hit Shift A to add an object, it allows you to bring bolts and nuts and things like that. Extra objects, we've already done that. Make sure there's a check there. And we're going to keep scrolling down. Let's see if there's anything special that I want you to make sure is checked. Oh, 3D Print Toolbox. Put a check mark there, because later on in the course we'll be working with 3D materials. And while you probably don't have a 3D printer, Blender allows us to go through and double check our objects to make sure that they are printable on a 3D printer. Mesh Edit Tools 2 and Mesh F2, you want check marks there. Under Mesh Loop Tools, you want a check mark there. Objects, add advanced object panels, not necessarily needed, but you could put a check mark in it. Add advanced objects, you want to have that check marked. And definitely Bool Tool, where it says Object Bool Tool, you want that. Carver is another one we're going to use eventually. You can put a check mark there. Let's see here. Auto tile size. Make sure under render auto tile size is checked. That'll help with your rendering as we get into rendering these objects. Make sure that the Cycles render engine is checked also. And that's it. Once you do that, hit the Save User Settings and close the panel up. Under the Tools section here, we'll go into a little depth about these. we cover this a little bit in one of the videos. This is your objects window, and every object you add to the screen will show up here, whether it is a mesh or a light or a camera, and you'll see the little icons there. Under our properties tab here, every time we select a different one of these property icons, things will change. For instance, the render icon brings up this little render icon here, and you can see these are all the settings that when we ask for a detailed real picture, these are the settings that we're going to use. The next tab is the scene tab. We're not going to use these properties at all, so you don't have to become familiar with them. Another scene tool we don't have to worry about. The world tool we will be adjusting in a little bit. I'm going to set it up for you to follow along to add in a background image which will give your objects a much more realistic look. Now this property here will change depending on the object we select. So this one here is object specific properties. We're not going to be touching this one too much yet, so don't worry about it. Under add constraints, we're not going to be using the constraints icon very much. We will be using the modifiers. These modifiers are very specific. We use about 10 of these to work with jewelry. Under data, we won't be using this at all. Materials, obviously, we'll be using to add a better look to our product. So you can save an image, show a customer, just, it'll give you a realistic look when we add the right materials. And the last three we won't be using under the jewelry course at all. So I don't want you to get too crazy with all the features that Blender has. We'll be going into depth as we use them. Now over on the object side, or the tools side on the left, I'm just going to come in the screen. I'm going to add an object. Let's just add a sphere. Okay. Now under the tools tab on the left, you'll see we have transform, edit, shading, history. History is a pretty cool one. We won't be using too much, but later on. Dynamic sky, you don't have to worry about that. Bool tools we'll be using quite a bit. So what I like to do is I like to move all the things that I use the most up so that I have them readily available. Now transform I don't use too much, so I'm actually going to bring that down. And then I have my duplicate link, delete, join, and we'll be going through these each as we move objects around, add objects, modify objects, join or remove and delete objects. So you want to familiarize yourself with the edit, the bool tools. That's pretty much what we're going to be using the most. Under create, this is like using the Shift A key. If you don't want to use Shift A or Shift A to add, you can come down here and select any one of these. For instance, if I wanted to add a cylinder, I'd click here and there's my cylinder. The sphere is still there, so you can see it doesn't swap things out, it just adds another object. If we go back to tools and I have that selected, you can see I can delete it here also, and it's gone. Relations, we'll get working with those somewhere down the line, but not right away. Animations, we'll be working with that down the road a little bit. We're not going to work with physics, we're not going to work with the grease pencil, and we're not going to work with display settings yet, but this is going to come quicker than you think because we have a measuring tool that allows us to draw a line between two objects to get a measurement. For instance, if you're working in a ring size, and you want to design a ring that's 3 millimeters wide, this is a way that we can measure it here, as well as if our cursor's in the main screen, the 3D window. This is called the 3D window. We press the N key. You can see we have certain features here, and the measuring tool, the properties will show up here. But we also have our measuring scale right in these boxes here. So here's our dimensions. And if I grab this object and hit S and size this, if you notice, all the numbers are going up there. So this is a good way also to put exact measurements in. So for instance, if I wanted the sphere to be 1 by 1 by 1, I could come here and press the 1, press 1 here, and press 1 there. And you can see now our sphere is half the size. Again, I can size this too, and I get S and 2, and we can double it. So there's a lot of different ways that you can work with Blender. For the most part, when we're doing tutorials, I'll be walking you through the quick sheets and the quick ways of getting things done. And practice, practice, practice. I can't say that enough, because the more you practice, the easier it gets. That's it. That's pretty much an introduction to what the tools are and the tabs that we'll be using for Blender. If you have any more questions, please let me know in the comments section, and I will be glad to help. Thanks very much.